Welcome to another episode of Reading Together from Sea Harp Press. I'm Eugene Luning, co-founder of Sea Harp, and today we'll be continuing our journey through C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Today we're going to be in Book 3, Chapter 3, which is entitled Social Morality. The first thing to get clear about Christian morality between man and man is that in this department, Christ did not come to preach any brand new morality. The golden rule of the New Testament, do as you would be done by, is a summing up of what everyone at bottom had already known to be right. Really great moral teachers never do introduce new moralities. It is quacks and cranks who do that. As Dr. Johnson said, people need to be reminded more often than they need to be instructed. The real job of every moral teacher is to keep on bringing us back, time after time, to the old simple principles which we are all so anxious not to see. Like bringing a horse back and back to the fence it has refused to jump, or bringing a child back and back to the bit in its lesson that it wants to shirk. The second thing to get clear is that Christianity has not, and does not profess to have, a detailed political program for applying do as you would be done by to a particular society at a particular moment. It could not have. It is meant for all men at all times, and the particular program which suited one place or time would not suit another. And anyhow, that is not how Christianity works. When it tells you to feed the hungry, it does not give you lessons in cookery. When it tells you to read the scriptures, it does not give you lessons in Hebrew and Greek, or even in English grammar. It was never intended to replace or supersede the ordinary human arts and sciences. It is rather a director which will set them all to the right jobs, and a source of energy which will give them all new life, if only they will put themselves at its disposal. I think what I'm hearing as I read through and listen to myself read to you these first couple of paragraphs of chapter 3 is that when Jesus said in John 10 that my sheep will know my voice, that is the essence of his moral teaching. As Lewis says, there are other and even pre-Jesus teachings in other religious systems that essentially point to the golden rule. So it's not as if Jesus gave us a totally different formulation that had never been thought about when he spoke those words, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But, friends, when you start to hear those words as if from his lips, and they cut to the heart, it's because he's drawing you in not only to obedience and morality, not only to a higher Christian ethic, he's drawing you to himself. What's so glorious about Jesus is that what he taught is what he lived. He was constantly loving others exactly as he intended to be loved and to receive, really, the love of the Father. So as we continue to think about this idea of a social morality, meaning a morality between people, let's remember that the calling of Jesus to his sheep is the calling of the heart to heart, yours to his. He wants you. He doesn't just want your obediences. He wants the union relationship for which he came and died and lived again. I'll keep reading. People say, the church ought to give us a lead. That is true if they mean it in the right way, but false if they mean it in the wrong way. By the church, they ought to mean the whole body of practicing Christians. And when they say that the church should give us a lead, they ought to mean that some Christians, those who happen to have the right talents, should be economists and statesmen, and that all economists and statesmen should be Christians, and that their whole efforts in politics and economics should be directed to putting do as you would be done by into action. If that happened, and if we others were really ready to take it, then we should find the Christian solution for our own social problems pretty quickly. But of course, when they ask for a lead from the church, most people mean they want the clergy to put out a political program. That is silly. The The clergy are those particular people within the whole church who have been specially trained and set aside to look after what concerns us as creatures who are going to live forever. And we are asking them to do a quite different job for which they have not been trained. The job is really on us, on the laymen. The application of Christian principles, say, to trade unionism or education must come from Christian trade unionists and Christian schoolmasters, just as Christian literature comes from Christian novelists and dramatists, not from the bench of bishops getting together and trying to write plays and novels in their spare time. And this is actually, like, for me, personally, in my own ministry, one of my heart cries. Because do you ever stop to think that you, perhaps you're a school teacher, or you're an accountant, or you yourself are a pastor, whatever role you are in this world, if you abide in Jesus in that role today, then all the people around you, in your workplace, at your school, I will often reference this, in the grocery store, the people around you are going to sense the atmosphere of the kingdom of heaven because you're abiding in Jesus. What does Jesus say he'll do for those who abide in him? They will bear much fruit. Whose fruit? His fruit, the fruit of the Spirit. So if you, as an accountant, teacher, pastor, soccer coach, whatever you do, if you do it in the Spirit, abiding in Jesus today, well, then you've done it. That's your job today. Not only your vocational job, I'm not even going to say your avocational, because following Jesus supersedes our actual career work. But if you follow Jesus today in the place he's set you, well done, good and faithful servant. You can rise again tomorrow and start all over again. It's like my old friend James Joyce, the novelist, once said, life is many days. So if you and I as laymen will get up in the morning and do it in the Spirit of Jesus all day long, whatever we do, well, then we've done it. That's the call. That's what it means to be a disciple in our contemporary context all the time. It elevates our lives. It makes our lives actually really interesting, even if our job doesn't interest us that much. Think about it. I'll keep reading. All the same, the New Testament, without going into details, gives us a pretty clear hint of what a fully Christian society would be like. Perhaps it gives us more than we can take. It tells us that there are to be no passengers or parasites. If man does not work, he ought not to eat. Everyone is to work with his own hands, and what is more, everyone's work is to produce something good. There will be no manufacture of silly luxuries and then of sillier advertisements to persuade us to buy them. And there is to be no swank or side, no putting on airs. To that extent, a Christian society would be what we now call leftist. On the other hand, it is always insisting on obedience and outward marks of respect from all of us to properly appointed magistrates, from children to parents, and I am afraid this is going to be very unpopular from wives to husbands. Thirdly, it is to be a cheerful society, full of singing and rejoicing, and regarding worry or anxiety as wrong. Courtesy is one of the Christian virtues, and the New Testament hates what it calls busybodies. If there were such a society in existence and you or I visited it, I think we should come away with a curious impression. We should feel that its economic life was very socialistic and in that sense advanced, but that its family life and its code of manners were rather old-fashioned, perhaps even ceremonious and aristocratic. Each of us would like some bits of it, but I am afraid very few of us would like the whole thing. That is just what one would expect if Christianity is the total plan for the human machine. We have all departed from that total plan in different ways, and each of us wants to make out that his own modification of the original plan is the plan itself. You will find this again and again about anything that is really Christian. Everyone is attracted by bits of it and wants to pick out those bits and leave the rest. That is why we do not get much further. And that is why people who are fighting for quite opposite things can both say they are fighting for Christianity. Something that he said here, and I actually do want to wade into these waters for a minute, is when we think about the actual lifestyle of a relatively robust-sized community, which was the early church, yes, friends, and for those of you who are really going to get nervous right now, sorry, it was socialistic. It didn't have a common sort of center of operations like a communistic, but socially, yes, they were sharing and sharing alike. So when people get absolutely fired up and talk so strongly against social democracy, I think, well, I'm not sure if they've read the book of Acts. Friends, those of us who follow Jesus need to have our hands wide open. So here's what I wanted to say that's slightly unpopular, so get yourself ready. Whether you are an American Republican or Democrat, here's my direct challenge to you politically. Stop what you're doing. Think for a moment. Look at the other side and try to think the best of what they are doing. If you're a Republican, you don't need to use these lazy talking points that every Democrat is a communist, socialist, Marxist. Stop saying that. You probably have never even read Marx. You don't know what you're talking about. The reality is, these progressive friends of ours are trying to figure out a more just society. Can we agree that that's okay? That perhaps they have some things maybe a little bit right, even echoing the early church? Or if you're a Democrat and you love to vilify those right-wing Republicans, well, what are they really if they are truly at base conservative? Well, they're trying to hold on to traditional things. They're trying to limit government. They're trying to create maximum liberty and freedom. Can we agree, my Democrat friends, that there may be some good things there? What I want to offer to you in the spirit of the early church, a beautiful melting pot of all kinds of tax collectors, zealots, people of all the continuum of life in that day. What I want to offer to us in this country in this time is if we give a little bit of the benefit of the doubt to the people who think differently than us, we can actually find a way to love each other. If you listen to the messaging that's handed down to you unthinkingly, you will continue to grow in hate. And that is not a position for followers of Jesus to take. Can we agree on that? So, the benefit of the doubt. Can we try that? Because I think if we look at the other side and look at the positives for which they are yearning and striving, at least we can learn to respect each other. Wild idea in 2023 as I record this. I'll keep reading. Now, another point. There is one bit of advice given to us by the ancient heathen Greeks and by the Jews in the Old Testament and by the great Christian teachers of the Middle Ages, which the modern economic system has completely disobeyed. All these people told us not to lend money at interest. And lending money at interest, what we call investment, is the basis of our whole system. Now, it may not absolutely follow that we are wrong. Some people say that when Moses and Aristotle and the Christians agreed in forbidding interest, or usury as they called it, they could not foresee the joint stock company and were only thinking of the private moneylender, and that therefore we need not bother about what they said. That is a question I cannot decide on. I am not an economist, and I simply do not know whether the investment system is responsible for the state we are in or not. This is where we want the Christian economist. But I should not have been honest if I had not told you that three great civilizations had agreed, or so it seems at first sight, in condemning the very thing on which we have based our whole life. One more point, and I am done. In the passage where the New Testament says that everyone must work, it gives as a reason in order that he may have something to give to those in need. Charity, giving to the poor, is an essential part of Christian morality. In the frightening parable of the sheep and the goats, it seems to be the point on which everything turns. Some people nowadays say that charity ought to be unnecessary, and that instead of giving to the poor, we ought to be producing a society in which there were no poor to give to. They may be quite right in saying that we ought to produce this kind of society. But if anyone thinks that, as a consequence, you can stop giving in the meantime, then he has parted company with all Christian morality. I do not believe one can settle how much we ought to give. I am afraid the only safe rule is to give more than we can spare. In other words, if our expenditure on comforts, luxuries, amusements, etc. is up to the standard common among those with the same income as our own, we are probably giving away too little. If our charities do not at all pinch or hamper us, I should say they are too small. There ought to be things we should like to do and cannot do because our charities expenditure excludes them. I am speaking now of charities in the common way. Particular cases of distress among our own relatives, friends, neighbors, or employees, which God, as it were, forces upon your notice, may demand much more, even to the crippling and endangering of your own position. For many of us, the great obstacle to charity lies not in our luxurious living or desire for more money, but in our fear of insecurity. This must often be recognized as a temptation. Sometimes our pride also hinders our charity. We are tempted to spend more than we ought on the showy forms of generosity, tipping, hospitality, and less than we ought on those who really need our help. Friends, as I read and I look back here at sort of our contemporary capitalist market economy, as he's talking here about the need for the Christian economist, as he talks here about charity, I'm going to bring up a historical figure, which again could be divisive, but don't let it be. We're adults, we can handle this. One of the great, I think, changes in the heart of a politician I've ever read through, especially if you've ever read Schlesinger's book on Robert F. Kennedy, the original RFK. During that course from the time of his brother's assassination to his own, there was a change of heart toward the poor that I have felt so compelling over the years. And something that I remember him saying, I don't know if it was in a speech or just as an aside, that I think about often. He says, 1 out of every 5 in this country is struggling. So it's up to those 4 to help him. Friends, isn't that a simple economy of charity? A simple economy in the midst of what we would call a consumer-based economy where we're all running around spending all the time. It's fascinating to listen. I listen often to NPR, to their kind of money report. And I'm fascinated often at the way that our entire economy is based on our own consumption. We literally are paying into our own economy so that we can then boast about our economy. It's just this beautiful circle that we somehow don't know how to step out of. But what if, as followers of Jesus and as those who walk down city sidewalks every day and see those in need, what if we think about the fact that 1 out of every 5 of us is struggling? What if I and 3 others band together and say, well, let's not let that be. Let's do our part. Let's figure out a way that the one who struggles need struggle no more. Doesn't that sound a little bit more like the Spirit of Jesus than, like Lewis says, just figuring out how someone else can handle it? Friends, we can handle it. We can handle lots of people's needs all the time. All right, I think, let's look, to the last paragraph of chapter 3 of book 3. And now, before I end, I am going to venture on a guess as to how this section has affected any who have read it. My guess is that there are some leftist people among them who are very angry that it has not gone further in that direction, and some people of an opposite sort who are angry because they think it has gone much too far. Maybe you feel the same way about some of my commentary. If so, that brings us right up against the real snag in all this drawing up of blueprints for a Christian society. Most of us are not really approaching the subject in order to find out what Christianity says. We are approaching it in the hope of finding support from Christianity for the views of our own party. And I think you and I can agree that we see lots of that today. We are looking for an ally, where we are offered either a master or a judge. I am just the same. There are bits in this section that I wanted to leave out, and that is why nothing whatever is going to come of such talks unless we go a much longer way round. A Christian society is not going to arrive until most of us really want it, and we are not going to want it until we become fully Christian. I may repeat, do as you would be done by, till I am black in the face, but I cannot really carry it out till I love my neighbor as myself. And I cannot learn to love my neighbor as myself till I learn to love God, and I cannot learn to love God except by learning to obey him. And so, as I warned you, we are driven on to something more inward, driven on from social matters to religious matters. For the longest way round is the shortest way home. Friends, I often, when I have spoken a little bit into the political sphere and made you uncomfortable, perhaps some of you I've lost along the way on this episode, I always want to remind you that the way we follow Jesus is ourselves following Jesus. That's what Lewis is saying here. To actually do these external things, the things without, we must be about the work within. What is that work? To abide in Jesus. To rise to every single day and commune with him in spirit. To know that his Holy Spirit is our only hope for these Christian virtues to which we strive. And then, having found that wellspring of life, to go out into the world and actually live it. To choose to turn the other cheek. To give out to that one who asks without any expectation of a return. To look for every single way we can to prove that the love of Jesus is efficacious even today. It is, as I've said often, the great adventure of human life. This is not just a ruling philosophy. It is a saving philosophy. We've been saved by it. Now let's prove it to others so that they might have a yearning themselves to be saved by him. We've been in Book 3, Chapter 3 of Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I absolutely always want to remind you, this is such a blessing to me to get to be with you, to offer a few of my own thoughts and to sort of shepherd our way through these fabulous books. I hope this chapter has been a blessing to you, and I hope you do have a wonderful rest of your day.